Last week, we briefly talked about the Federal Maritime Commission's fiscal year 2024 budget request justification. It's a document that they posted on their website. I linked to it. I'll link to it again here. This week, we're going to dive into that a little bit more in a little bit more detail and combine that with the live hearing that happened yesterday. Did you catch that hearing? There's a recording of it, so you can still watch it. There's a lot of great information coming out of that hearing. So the hearing was the U.S. House of Representatives, Transportation and Infrastructure, T&I, the committee budget request hearing. Spoiler alert, Congressman Dusty Johnson of South Dakota announced that he and co-bill sponsor Congressman John Garamendi, will be introducing their bill for Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2.0 next week. There's a lot to cover today. Stick around. Hi, welcome to By Land and by Sea and on the Week in Supply Chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Beegan, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. You need an attorney, contact an attorney. So before we get into the discussion of the day, let's go through my top 3 stories of the week. So story number 1, like I said at the outset, OSRA 2.0. It's going to be introduced. So OSRA 2.0 is supposed to be introduced in the House next week, I hear. Maybe even today. There's some mumblings that maybe today it's being released. So that's what Congressman Johnson said yesterday, that it's going to be released next week. And like I said, this is at the FMC and MARAD budget request review hearing yesterday. So U.S. House of Representatives, Transportation and Infrastructure member, Congressman Dusty Johnson, announced that he and his bill co-sponsor, Congressman John Garamendi, plan to introduce their continued work on global ocean shipping through this Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2.0 bill. It's likely going to be named something a little bit different, maybe technical amendments or something like that. But this is how it's kind of being referred to, OSRA 2.0. I expect that it's going to include some of that language that we've been talking about, certainly here, but it's been getting a lot of traction recently for the FMC to have the authority to deny alliance formations if the FMC determines the agreement filing is anti-competitive or against the principles of the Shipping Act. Like we've said many, many, many times here, the FMC does not have the authority to deny an alliance agreement that gets filed in front of it. Maybe not a problem. It hasn't really been a problem so far. But if they want to stop an alliance agreement filed in front of it, let's say maybe it has a 70% market share in the future, right? I mean, crazy things have happened in the past few years that I kind of applaud the being a little bit proactive here approach. And it seems like the FMC should be able to deny that in-house. But there's some good arguments for maybe not going all the way with that. But it seems like they should be able to, if they can agree, if they can pass it in-house, or I guess not slow it down, they should be able to deny it in-house too. Otherwise, currently they have to file an injunction in a court, in an outside court that arguably doesn't understand the FMC, the Shipping Act, or the kind of anti-competitive nature of the Shipping Act in the ocean shipping world. I don't know. It seems like it makes some sense that the FMC should have this denial ability. It seems like Congressman John Garamendi and Dusty Johnson kind of agree with that because, like I said, this language is probably going to find its way into OSRA 2.0. We'll see what the actual language is that gets released, but this is actually in support of what FMC Commissioners Carl Bensel and Commissioner Max Vekich, they wrote a letter to Congress last fall, I believe, basically requesting this authority, saying that this is a big missing piece of the FMC's current authority. And look, the ocean shipping's 5 minutes of fame. I don't think it's over yet, right? I mean, this is like such brave new world that the FMC or ocean shipping generally is such a hot topic. And arguably OSRA is still a pretty niche area. But I don't think the 5 minutes is over yet. I'm excited. I'm going to keep watching. I'll let you know what I hear. All right, so story number 2. This week, the FMC announced that they were checking on the compliance of ocean carriers and MTOs with recent rulings on per diem charges. So they've been kind of checking for a while. Obviously, it's their job to be monitoring in general. They've been checking about compliance kind of on a routine basis. So I'm just going to read the announcement that they put out. It's pretty succinct. It's pretty direct on what they're doing. And I think it really kind of encompasses what they're saying, what they're trying to do here. So I'm going to quote, "The Federal Maritime Commission is actively seeking information to confirm that ocean carriers and marine terminal operators are complying with the law following a precedential decision it issued addressing when per diem detention charges can be billed." So that's what the FMC is saying. They passed a decision and then they're going to reference it. But they're wondering, this decision, this case law is now law. Is it being adhered to? I think they're also trying to kind of draw attention to this decision. It's an informal decision, meaning it was probably brought in small claims. That's an over casualization of less than 50,000 brought to the administrative law judges. So I'm going to continue here on the announcement. In a December order in TCW Incorporated versus Evergreen Shipping Agency Corp. And Evergreen Line Joint Services Agreement, docket number 1996I, that's how you know it's informal. The commission held that the charging of per diem when a port was closed and equipment could not be returned was unjust and unreasonable. I'm going to stop there from reading verbatim. In that case, the commission held that the charging of per diem, so detention or demurrage, they're not being exactly specific over per diem detention or demurrage, but it says when a port is closed and equipment could not be returned. They said that was unjust and unreasonable. How many times have we all talked about this, or has this been brought up, certainly by shippers, what to do if a port's closed, you can't get your stuff and you're still being charged. This is one case. This is very specific and a general, this is not specific to your information. This is general educational purposes. So I don't want you relying on this case right off the bat. But encouraging for shippers who feel as though, a port being closed and equipment couldn't be returned is unjust. So that's what they're saying. So I'm going to continue on the statement here. The Commission, through its Vessel Operating Common Carrier Audit Program, is contacting the 11 largest ocean carriers, calling the United States to confirm these shipping lines are adjusting their demurrage and detention practices accordingly. A separate outreach effort to marine terminal operators is being conducted simultaneously to ensure that they are fully complying with the May 2020 rule. I'm going to stop here again. The May 2020 rule is the interim rule on detention and demurrage. We've covered that here before. We're going to talk about it again in a little bit. But the FMC is really leaning heavily on this interpretive rule. It was adopted under OSRA 2022. So if you haven't listened to my by land and by sea episode on this interpretive rule, this detention demurrage interpretive rule that Commissioner Dye spearheaded, the May 2020 rule, as it's kind of being briefly described here, you should go take a look at it. There's a lot of very relevant, still current information in there. And it's law, right? I mean, it was adopted under OSRA 2022. So I'm going to continue on reading the last paragraph of the statement here. That regulation clarifies how the Commission interprets statutory prohibitions against unjust or unreasonable regulations and practices on receiving, handling, storing, or delivering property. In the recent TCW versus Evergreen case, the Commission ordered Evergreen to cease and desist from imposing per diem charges when imposition of per diem charges does not serve its incentivizing purposes, such as when an empty equipment cannot be returned on weekends, holidays, and port closures. That's pretty big. And I appreciate that they kind of brought light to this, that they said they're doing, a review to make sure that compliance is there. But I mean, they're outright hitting that pretty straight on, saying, look, it's got to be for incentivization purposes. And what that means is if empty equipment cannot be returned on weekends, holidays, and port closures, that's not part of incentivization. Again, general information, general educational purposes here, not legal advice directly related to your matter. I encourage you to contact an attorney if you have questions on how this applies to your specific case, but encouraging for clarity's sake, right? And encouraging for clarity's sake, and it might end up saving some of the shippers some money here, but something to look to keep an eye on. And certainly I think the FMC is going to keep us updated here. All right, story number 3. A really interesting article out of Sea Trade Maritime. I actually missed it last week and just found it this week, authored by Marcus Hand. So I'm not going to bury the lead here. I'm just going to tell you what the recopied text, the kind of relevant recopied text. Annual contracts are being negotiated between shippers and lines on the Trans-Pacific container trade. ZIM warns if rates are too low, it will stop sailing. Okay, that's big, right? That's a lot. That's big news. Like I said, it took me a week to find this, to come across it. As we know, container rates have gone from their $20,000 peak on the Trans-Pacific container line, and fallen exceptionally quickly, down now hovering just below 2,000. I mean, we're kind of, I've even seen 1,200, 1,400 for that same route. And just like we saw in the 2010s, it's not unheard of for ocean carriers to end the year in the red when container rates drop too low. I mean, that's kind of why we saw the alliance vessel sharing agreements come around, because that was unsustainable for any of the carriers to rate in the red. I mean, you were going to lose some carriers, and we did. We lost Hanjin in the mix. But that's partly why this vessel sharing agreement, New World, came. So look, there obviously is a break-even point, and I think that's really what Zim is saying here, right? They're saying, look, we're close to the drop-even, lose-money point. I keep saying that even though the industry, specifically shippers, suffered under the extreme rate hikes in container rates, honestly, nobody was more surprised by those extremely high container rates than the ocean carriers themselves. They historically don't make profits in the billions. That was a new thing for them. And quite a few of them have reinvested that into their businesses, whether it's new ships or generally logistics or digitization, upgrades, IT upgrades. I've seen quite a bit of reinvesting that into the industry. Look, I've also said this a bunch, and I've been hearing it more and more recently. The whole ocean shipping world is really a pendulum, right? It's swaying extremely towards the carriers, and now it's swinging back towards the shippers pretty aggressively, but it's not going to stop there. And look, I expect, just like Zim's CFO and Executive Vice President Xavier Destro, he said that there's a middle range that is a natural equilibrium. I tend to agree there. Look, I don't think it's going to be as strong as what Zim and perhaps other carriers are probably hoping for, but I don't think we're going to stay in this sub 2,000 container rates for an extended period of time. It's really interesting, though. I can't believe I missed this article last week. Great article, very interesting. All right, well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the day. We're going to be talking about the budget today. We started to talk about the budget justification, the Federal Maritime Commission's budget, to be specific. We started to talk about the budget justification document last week. So let me give you a quick overview of what the FMC is really asking for here. So the FMC released its 2024 budget justification in advance of this budget hearing that we saw just yesterday. Well, it's a really great self-reflection summary of how the FMC thinks they did over the past year. I said this last week, it's almost like a self-assessment that we all fill out right before we have our annual reviews. And technically, we the American public taxpayers on listening, are the boss, right? We're the bosses of the FMC. And so it's up to us, well, through Congress, right, to determine if they deserve a raise. Did they do well over this past year? And are they up for a raise this year? So to support the Commission's mission and statutory responsibilities, the FMC said the total budget request for fiscal year 2024 is $43,720,000. That's $43 million, almost $44 million. $33 million of that is just for salaries and expenses to support 180 full-time positions and 163 full-time equivalents. Basically, it gets a little complicated on what FTP versus FTE means, but basically in the 160, 180 range of current employees. They also have $10.9 million allocated toward other operating expenses, including rent, building security, information technology, and administrative services. They had go into the IT section of updating, refreshing their website, just making sure that kind of all of their general, everybody's getting more digitally savvy. The FMC is continuing on with it. The FMC went through a pretty good digitization refresh, new computers, all that good stuff, in the early 2010s under the leadership of Chairman Mario Cordero. But it's time, right? I mean, we're maybe 10 years past that, and we all know how fast, quickly computers change. Okay, so that was the budget justification. So FMC Chairman Dan Maffei was also in front of the House T&I Committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, just yesterday, with opening remarks and answering questions of all the congresswomen that were there, all in the vein of promoting and probably a little bit defending the work of the FMC. So in general, the work of the FMC seemed to be not mostly understood, which is very new that congressmen in general, kind of as a broad statement, not only know what the FMC is, but understand their authority, which is great. But also it seems like the congressman really appreciated the work of the FMC, which is exceedingly great, right? Like that means they understand it and that they kind of see the direction, understand the value. They know what the FMC is doing, and then they can appropriately and accurately discern whether the FMC deserves this raise, right? This budget request. Before Containergeddon, Congestiongeddon, whatever you want to call it, honestly, the FMC, as we all know, was very an agency in the federal government. Now, it's certainly still probably lesser known by the society as a whole, but I would guess, and I would bet, that most ocean shipping supply chain professionals have at least heard of the FMC now. And really, that's why you follow me, right? To keep building that baseline FMC knowledge. And look, we are so happy you're here. So continue listening. Okay, so Chairman Maffei's opening remarks. I'm going to start quoting some of his language here. I think it's important. I think he does a great job of kind of summarizing things. So, and plus to hear it from the horse's mouth, I think that's a great thing because then we can break down what he actually said. So he said, I'm going to quote here, this is the budget hearing opening remarks, and he has these online, so you can go check out the FMC website. I'm also going to link it here. The nation's freight transportation systems were largely overwhelmed by the unprecedented high demand that resulted from COVID-related consumer spending patterns. Right, we all know that. However, there were also widespread reports from importers and exporters that the large multinational ocean container ship operators were taking advantage of a situation already economically favorable to them. The most cited example was additional freight charges called detention charge being improperly imposed or improperly assessed for laden containers that were not picked up on schedule or empty containers and other equipment that was not returned on time. The assertion was that many of these charges, amounting to millions and millions of dollars for even a medium-sized shipper, did not comply with FMC rules such as the May 2020 Interpretive Rule on Detention and Demurrage, authored by Commissioner Rebecca Dye and approved unanimously by the Commission. I told you, we were going to be talking about that interpretive rule again. So that's what he said. That was the language. That's the statement that was released on the FMC website. I wanted to specifically highlight this because I think it gives a few tells. One, that the FMC is doubling down, tripling down on the May 2020 Interpretive Rule merge that was led by Commissioner Rebecca Dye. It was also supported by OSRA. Like I said, it was adopted under OSRA. So it's law. And guiding document. But it's a great document with lots of very relevant and still current information. I said it earlier, I'm going to encourage you to go back and review it and go back if you want the brief Cliff Notes version. Check out the BIC episode on it where we covered that and we really talked more about what this interpretive rule has in it. This piece of the opening statement also illuminates why the FMC is so focused on fairness and detention and demurrage is front and center there, right? I mean, he even goes after it. They are flag neutral as an agency. They are just wanting to make sure that fairness is across the board. And he highlights right off the bat that shippers felt that it was unfair. And even though the rates were moving toward the ocean carriers, he's saying, look, I hear the shippers here. They're saying that maybe there was some inappropriate, advantageous moves by the ocean carriers. And he's not saying anybody, but he certainly pointed that out in one of the opening paragraphs of his opening statement. So it just brings some attention to how the FMC is approaching all of this. I think they're still remaining fair. I almost think that statement makes it feel as though the FMC is exceedingly pro-shipper. I think that they are trying to reset the fairness, the fairness pendulum or the fairness scale. But I think that they've been very fair in general. Because at the very same time, during that same period, they said there's robust competition happening. So, it was a wild time, right? All right. So Chairman Maffei also gave an update on the FMC's OSRA 22 implementation. So I'm just going to quote this again because I think that he does a great job of explaining what was going on. So he says, I'm committed to implementing OSRA in the spirit intended by Congress. We have made substantial progress in meeting our obligations under the law since its enactment by President Biden on June 16, 2022. To date, we, the FMC, have already updated our civil regulations to include refunds of a charge. That was a new area. We talked about that last week. established a process for accepting, investigating, and adjudicating charge complaints. Charge complaints were new under OSRA, a brand new thing. Posted to the Commission's website the Fact Finding 29 final report. So Fact Finding 29 was another initiative under Commissioner Dye's leadership, and just a great overview of, you should go check it out. And we've covered it actually on a By Land and By Sea episode as well. I'm going to continue on. Up to the annual report to include any concerning practices by ocean common carriers. Continue to maintain an Office of Consumer Affairs and Dispute Resolution Services, that's CATERS. That's something that has been around for quite a while, maybe even 10 years, more than 10 years at this point, but something that OSRA mandated they create and maintain, already created, but it's a great office, Consumer Assistance and Dispute Resolution Services. You should definitely check them out. Certainly if you have any household goods movements too, that's kind of like a great area for CATERS to cover. Continuing on, hired no fewer than 7 positions to support investigations and over sanctions. Determined if congestion of carriage of goods has created an emergency situation, such that the Commission needs to order information sharing. Entered into an agreement with the Transportation Research Board to conduct a study and develop best practices for on-terminal and near-terminal chassis pools. We covered chassis 2 weeks ago. The TRB, this is a report that is underway. They already had their public hearing on it, so they're moving right along. And then been in contact with relevant agencies responsible for sections of OSRA dealing with review of potential discrimination against transportation of qualified hazardous materials, use of inland ports for storage and transfer of containers, and report on adoption of technology at U.S. ports. We didn't cover many of those pieces much on By Land and By Sea, but that's not for a lack of importance. That's why I wanted to highlight what Commissioner Maffei said as all of the different items that they're covering. I'm going to continue on. We just have 2 more bullet points here. So significant work has been completed on other requirements of OSRA, and we have made substantial progress in issuing a proposed final rule on D&D invoicing and billing, and issuing a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. So like I said, we haven't covered all of these less popular areas, and by that I don't mean to decrease their importance by not mentioning them or by not highlighting them more. I simply wanted to restate what the chairman said so that you know the vastness and expansiveness of the OSRA to-do list for the FMC. This is exceptionally important to note. During this budget increase moment, the FMC is only asking for $43 million here to do all of their normal work, plus, the normal work, ensuring fair and efficient movement of cargo to protect the U.S. consumer, importer, and exporter. Just something, just their regular stuff. Plus, all of the new directives under OSRA 22. So with this OSRA 2.0 on the horizon, I just want to shout this from the rooftops. This is already an incredibly lean agency. Any new directives need to come with funding associated with it, and not just promised funding, but actual appropriated funding. Okay, I'll step off my soapbox. Okay, so Chairman Maffei also covered charge complaints in his opening statement. This is brand new, right? So what he said, charge complaints created by OSRA is generating a considerable amount of work for our investigators and enforcement attorneys. The public has responded favorably to the option of submitting billing complaints under a streamlined process, allowing for more rapid review of claims than the other pre-existing options that were available at the Commission. Between June 16, 2022, when OSRA was signed, and March 14, 2023, 260 charge complaints have been filed. 260, that's crazy. 97 of which were perfected and assigned for investigation, meaning 97 of which had all of the correct information in it and then were then assigned for further investigation, further information. Some of the things that they had said previously that might not be perfected, complete submission is they might not have the specific Shipping Act violation listed. It might be comboing too many things, missing documentation. They have a whole list of things to submit. It's not a complicated list of things to submit, but it's important that you hit all of that because they can't move forward until they have everything that they require for these charge complaints. So 260 filed, 97 of which could continue on for investigation. And then he continues, except for one case where the Commission's Bureau of Enforcement, Investigations, and Compliance issued a show cause order, still pending. All other cases have been voluntarily settled by the ocean carriers once the disputed charge has been brought to their attention. So we covered this show cause order that was brand new coming out of the charge complaints process. And basically it was a success, whether or not it's correct, right? But it was a success of the whole process going all the way through. It basically showed it was properly filed. The investigation took place. The investigation agreed with the filer of the charge complaint. And then they moved it over to Office of Enforcement, who then said, yes, we agree as well. And so then they created the show cause why we shouldn't require a refund or require or issue civil penalties here. So that's just one of the 260 charge complaints. Basically everything else has been voluntarily settled out, whether that's a waiver, a refund, whatever it is. It's amazing. And I say 260, really we're looking at 97 of the perfected, correctly filed. All of those, 96 of those were either dropped or settled or waived of the fee at issue, the complaint, the charge that's being complained about. So he continues. Approximately $800,000 in charges have been waived or refunded. Processing charge complaints requires the work of staff from our Office of the Secretary, the Bureau of Investigations, and the Bureau of Enforcement. We are assessing the requirements for accepting, investigating, and adjudicating charge complaints to make certain we have sufficient resources devoted to this effort. Nobody knew how popular this was going to be. It is very popular, which is great because the more that you can get the FMC to determine fairness or what's going on, I think is good, right? I mean, it's just going to help clean up the industry, maybe detangle the wildness that's been the past few years. So Chairman Maffei continued and covered the monitoring of alliances and other regulated entities of the FMC, including MTOs and ports. And I want to also highlight the exact language that's covered here because I think this is also important. The FMC protects competition in U.S. ocean transportation, ensuring that there is both efficiency and reliability in the supply chain for U.S. exporters and importers. The FMC's competition program consists of careful analysis of agreements, oversight of agreements, and the marketplace continues through the important work done by our Bureau of Trade and Analysis. As I've testified before, this is Chairman Maffei's ocean carrier alliance agreements are subject to the most frequent and monitoring of any class of filed agreement. BTA's monitoring program provides the Commission with unequaled insight into the behavior and business decisions of ocean carriers participating in agreements. Unlike reviews of mergers and acquisitions, alliance agreements, alliance agreements monitoring is continuous. So he said, unlike reviews of mergers and acquisitions, alliance agreement monitoring is continuous. And we receive detailed information on operational data, minutes from meetings among agreement principals, and minutes from regularly scheduled alliance meetings. In effect, we have insight into the alliance's commercial and operational decisions that go straight to the company's top leadership. We also have the ability to change alliance agreements reporting requirements as warranted. That's interesting. I guess I didn't really understand that, but the FMC, Chairman Maffei is saying that the FMC has the ability to change the reporting requirements, which makes sense, right? It's all part of their monitoring. He continues, we did so twice during the past 2 years, most significantly in 2022, by requiring enhanced pricing and capacity information be filed as part of the monitoring process. He says, I should add that this is not just ocean subject to monitoring requirements. Monitoring for marine terminal operator agreements on file at the Commission that have rate discussion authority, something that the carrier alliance agreements do not have. So MTOs can have rate discussion authority. Carrier alliance agreements do not have that. Were changed over the past year to give BTA more insight into how these companies operate when they utilize an agreement. This is all great, right? This is all great. And I really appreciate the specificity that Chairman Maffei goes into here, specifically saying that, look, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, doesn't have this continuous review that these alliance agreements do. And so, but basically what he's saying is we are watching these alliance agreements very closely. There's been a lot of outcry saying, who's watching these guys, right? Who's watching these foreign agreements, foreign carriers? The FMC through Chairman Maffei is like, we are. That's our job, and this is how we're doing it. We're doing it well. I agree. I think they're doing a pretty good job. So one more thing that I want to point out from the budget justification document is the anticipated timelines and next steps for the three main rulemakings that we were watching. If you want to follow along, these start on page 24 of the document, the budget justification document, Appendix B. So the detention and demurrage rulemaking, which FMC Chair Maffei said they're working on final rule text. We weren't sure if this would be a supplemental comment period added, like the unreasonable refusal to deal, but it looks like that's not going to be the case. That's what he said in the hearing yesterday. He said they're working on the final rule text. The detention and demurrage rulemaking in the justification document has anticipated proposed rule schedule, next action of June 2023. So that's when we're going to see the next document come out of the D&D rulemaking. This whole rule, this D&D billing requirements rulemaking is required to be finished up by June 16, 2023. So it looks like they're mostly on schedule here. There's likely going to be a 30, maybe 60-day effective date delay. So when the final text comes out, it'll say 30 days from this date or 60 days from the date of publishing the Federal Register. So I'm guessing that we're looking at a July-August actual start date for any of these new proposals that we've seen through the detention and demurrage billing requirements. We've seen some carriers start to change some of their practices already for who gets billed. But remember, this is all still proposed rule, not final rule yet. That likely won't come out till June, according to their justification document. We've also been watching the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations provided by an common carrier. This one, remember, already went through the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. This was in the fall. We were waiting on final language. However, the FMC decided that it was most appropriate to reopen this rulemaking for a supplemental comment period. And I say reopen, it was never closed. But they want another comment period round to help further refine the language associated with this rule. Chairman Maffei said that this is likely one of the most complicated rules with the most delicate balance to get it right. He said the FMC wants to ensure that they don't impose unintended consequences here. And I applaud that approach, right? Chairman Maffei previously said getting it right is better than getting it fast. Yes, agreed. The justification document says that the next scheduled action is likely not until June 2023. So we're going to be busy in June, right? We have both the D&D billing requirements, and then maybe we're going to have the supplemental comment period coming out from the unreasonable refusal to deal. So the last rule that have been anxiously waiting on is the definition of unfair, unjust, or discriminatory methods. In the description of the rules, the FMC says, specifically, the Commission is proposing to define the elements necessary to establish a violation and the criteria it will consider in assessing whether a method is unfair or unjustly discriminatory. So this one's going to be really interesting to see, I think. How specific will the FMC go with this? They're saying they're going to be showcasing identifying the criteria for assessment of whether unfair or unjustly discriminatory, which is already not allowed, right? Unfair or unjustly discriminatory methods is something that's outlined in OSRA, also in the regs of the FMC, but this is going to bring a little bit more color, understanding, intention, I guess peeking behind the curtain, right, of how the FMC interprets this. So I don't know, are they going to be leaving this more general? Are they going to have case law make the fine tunes, or will they be very specific and take a very direct approach? My guess is going to be a balance of the two, of course, right? But I think they're going to err on the side of the more general approach and let the case law fill in. They certainly don't want unintended consequences. I think that that's what they really hearkened on with the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate. But they do want to put their foot down. We've seen that through their language over the past year or so. They're not messing around when it comes to unfair or unjustly discriminatory methods, and rightfully so. This is a bummer, though, because the anticipated date of next action is for this notice of proposed rulemaking. So it looks like they're going to go right for it. They're not going to do the general questions of the ANPRM, Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. They're going to go straight to, here's our language that we think. The bummer is it's probably not going to be released until August 2023, according to the justification document, the budget justification. Look, their final text on this was supposed to be out June 16th. But honestly, look, 3 major rulemakings in just over a year, that's pretty good. And that's not to mention the other rulemakings, the brand new process of charge complaints, and everything else Chairman Maffei listed off in his OSRA implementation list. Last year, they only asked for $34 million for their 2023 budget. So this is a jump to $43 million. But honestly, even $43 million is a line item in most other budget requests. Some years at the congressional budget hearing, when the FMC has historically sat next to MERAD and sometimes Coast Guard was looped in, the congressman would joke and say the small budget request of the FMC up against MARAD and Coast Guard. I mean, it was almost kind of comical, right? It really is a small amount, $43 million, for the incredible scope of the industry that they monitor, regulate, and oversee. Last week, I called this their annual performance review. I think they deserve a raise, right? What do you think? And I think maybe even a bonus on top of that request. I think they're doing a lot of great work. They have a huge timeline and to-do list, but I think they're doing a pretty good job. All right. Well, as always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes. I can't stress that enough, especially with some of the cases that we brought up today. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. Otherwise, for the non-legal questions, the e-learning, general industry information, and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you want to listen to these episodes on demand, or if you missed any previous episodes, check out the podcast By Land and by Sea. If you prefer to see the video, they live on the page By Land and by Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. And while you're at it, check out the website, maritimeprofessor.com. So until next week, this is Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.